The story is going to be called The Garage That Ate Frank Elder, and we'll see if we can put together a decent story to go around that title. So let's begin. We should have told the police the truth right from the start. Not sure what difference it would have made, but we'll never know now. If we were going to lie, as we ended up doing, we probably should have agreed on a story before we ran back. No, let's not use back. Before we ran through that culvert behind Frank's grandfather's house. Strange thing is, if we had agreed on a story, then they might, then the police looking for Frank those first couple weeks might have found us out. What happened to Frank's grandfather later was a big part of it too. When we met up again, the four of us who really knew what happened to Frank, we had no plans of going back out to where he disappeared. Two weeks is a long time. 2 weeks is a long time for 4 kids to keep a secret like that. We should have agreed on a story. Cops talked to me 3 times those 2 weeks. I was dying to find out what the others had said. If they'd showed back up a 4th time, I'm sure I would have confessed. Our folks weren't keen on letting us run around so soon after one of our crew of 5 had disappeared. Frank wasn't the only kid to go missing in Butler, South Carolina that summer, or any of the summers on either side. Alright. My parents didn't talk about that. Alright, say middle school kids are more connected to the world these days, but back then my world was cartoons playing by the river and running around our neighborhoods. Parents would say for us to stay in groups and to stay in groups, don't talk to strangers, and come home before dark. They never said kids were being grabbed all the time. It wasn't until I was older that I found out just how many kids and teens turned up missing in Fuller Beach and on through the county in those years. What happened to Frank Elder was worse than all that. 2 weeks of holding onto that secret, the 4 of us, the survivors, were set free to stay in a group, not talk to strangers, and to be home before dark. If our folks had any idea what was good for us, they'd have added, don't ever go to that garage again. I think we all expected never to go again. I'm sure that was the right choice. But minutes after we met back up, let's make it, I use back too much. I'm going to try to exclude it every time I can. Minutes after we met up, we walked that dry culvert lined with concrete and patched with tar. If it rained too long or the pipes got clogged, a dozen streets would be flooded for days. This summer we saw Frank for the last time was dry, though. It wasn't any faster to get to, I wrote some names down so I wouldn't have to make them all up, to Ripon Court, the street Frank's grandpa Nelson Elder lived on, by going through the culvert. Alright, it wasn't any faster to get to Ripon Court, the street Frank's grandpa Nelson Elder lived on, by going through the culvert. Frank lived the farthest. Let me break that up. I want to control copy. We had no intention of going out that far, especially after what had happened. Alright. Frank lived the farthest out into West Butler of all of us. We all went to Butler Middle School, but Frank's grandpa lived closer to Union Neck. It wasn't any faster to get to Ripon Court, the street Frank's grandpa Nelson Elder lived on, but by going through the culvert, we avoided the streets out that way because Ripon let's say because the neighborhoods were mixed. I'm not proud of how I thought about such things. Not proud of how I thought about such things as a kid. And I think differently now, but that's how it was at that time in that county. Nelson Elder was the last white man on Ripon. Both those towns have set borders I'm sure. But at that time, the border was considered Ripon Street, Ripon Court, and the Elder House. We walked the culvert to avoid the attention of the neighbors. The main reason we got together before we found ourselves climbing that concrete slope into the backyard was to compare stories. The police had spoken to all of us. Everyone else twice, but me 3 times. Claire Little had told them that Frank had gone back inside before we all left for home. She stuck with her story. Mitch Harrell said Frank had left before we did, but then on his second interview changed his story to say that Frank had stayed in the garage after we left, and he never saw him come out. that was so dangerously close to the truth that we all stared for a moment before going on. I need to split these into separate paragraphs. Claire Little, she'd stuck with her story. Okay, let's make Mitch's a separate. I kind of wonder if Mitch's real name was Mitchell. He and I never spoke. I never saw him again after that summer to ask. Okay, a little bit of foreboding there. All right, need 2 more kids now. Olive Fowler kept her story simple. We all played together. We all ended up at Frank's house. Eventually, we all went home, but she couldn't remember when Frank wasn't with us any longer. I had too much detail in my story. That's why I got the 3rd visit. I too had stumbled on admitting we were at Frank's house. It's good we all kept that detail. My name is Zaid Banks, but the crew back then called me ZB. Olive just said ZB and shook her head after hearing my convoluted version of things. We had just started walking then. No plan. And when you have no plan and don't agree on a story, you tend to end up in the worst places. So we stood in Nelson Elder's backyard at the top of the culvert, looking at the detached garage where Frank disappeared forever. It wasn't until that moment, with our eyes on that terrible place again, that we all felt the depth of danger we'd wandered back into. Nelson's ancient Cadillac. I know I'm spelling this wrong. See if I spelled it close enough. Nelson's ancient Cadillac showed rust along the bottom edge that showed from under the faded tarp covering it. The concealed vehicle sat on flat tires under the metal overhang beside the garage. I don't remember who stepped forward first. I think it was me, but that may just be because of what I did later. We might have stayed friends if we'd all turned around and left in that moment. One of us stepped forward, though, and the rest followed. Alright, cruising right along here. Okay. We walked wide around the parking pad and along the brick back of the house. The glass for the picture window in the living room / dining room / kitchen was a wash of white from the overcast sky. There was no rain that day. There was no rain that day, or most days that summer. but there was no sun either. The garage door was chipped paint and wood, the same color as the rust on the neglected car. It was as heavy as sin and had to be lifted with all its weight on the folding arms instead of tracks. We weren't tall, any of us, but the girls were taller than me. Even I could see through the dirty squares of glass 3 panels up on the peeling door. We each took a window and cupped our hands to shade out the whiteness for a view inside. As scared as I was that day, I can't believe I touched that door to look into those shadows. The thing was so heavy, maybe I believed the devil himself couldn't lift it to get out. Tools with a darker shade of rust mixed with grease lined the pegged walls. Tables along 2 walls cluttered high with unfinished projects. Cabinets along the back wall stood dented and partially open. One showed, I'll say revealed, one revealed softball equipment. The others kept their secrets for the moment. If not for touching the glass, we'd have missed the vibration starting again. All of us backed away on the uneven paving of Elder's Drive way. Let's keep that the same sentence. Like we'd just woken from a nightmare in which we'd come back to the very place we'd all sworn silently that we'd never return to. By then, the vibration could be felt under our feet, and the edges of that building blurred with the motion. I didn't have a word for it at the time, but based on my work since growing up, I know the structure was wavering in and out of resonance. Sometimes things were balanced, but then they would rattle and thump as if the frequency had decided to tear the garage down. Working with machines later, I knew that if you kept them running, all right, let's say working with precision machines. Working with precision machines later, I knew if you kept them running in that state, they'd tear themselves apart, and you'd have more than a bolt to tighten or a strut to replace at that point. Something fell over with a crash but the noise wouldn't stop. It approached the heavy... Oops. Get some things spelled right here. It approached the heavy door. It approached the heavy door from within, scraping and scratching the concrete as it stalked us. Rolling, I told myself. It's just something rolling across the concrete. More things crashed, and the doors of the cabinets swung open. Recognized the grind of old hinges and the hollow noises within metal cabinets. Then I swore I heard footsteps underneath the garage that took Frank. Underneath the shake of the garage that took Frank. I could not convince myself that was anything rolling on the floor inside. Then something I didn't remember happening before until it started. Okay, let's say then there was. Alright, then there was something I didn't remember happening until it started again. Maybe I had blocked it out, and if I'd stayed away, I'd not remember it now either. Voices, whispers, really. If not for all that vibration and Frank vanishing, I might have convinced myself that it was just in my head. But they were voices. But they were whispering voices. No denying it while it was happening. it was like wood, nails, and scraps inside the garage were trying to communicate. I think now it was far more basic than that. It was like the structure was trying out different voices to decide which one it liked before it decided if it had anything it wanted to say. I know Mitch ran first. I remember because he bolted for the street, but then turned heel and skirted the brick corner of the house so close I could hear that brick and mortar edge pull at his clothes. Also, running after his back, calling for him, is the last clear memory I have of old Mitch. Maybe we saw each other in the halls in middle school or at the high school later, but I really don't remember. The four of us stayed together through the culvert, but I walked home with the girls myself, feeling awkward, guilty, and high on fear. Mitch didn't come with us when we returned to the Elder garage a few days later. Claire, Olive, and me and I went just the three of us. We discussed it this time. We agreed we needed to do something. Telling the police we had lied when Frank telling the police we had lied when Frank had been missing for going on 3 weeks was out of the question for us. So that left going back ourselves to see if we could find something. We only made it as high as the top edge of the concrete behind the yard. Nelson Elder leaned on his tarped car and cried as he wept. It was a high, awful noise that set my teeth and reminded me of the vibrations of that evil building. The man's clothes hung on his bony frame. The knobs of his shoulders bobbed with his hitching chest. He shook and wavered on his feet with his sorrow. I felt like his grief was my fault. I had no power over whatever lived within or beyond that cursed building. But I sat on the truth about Frank and denied it to his only family. We just watched in silence at the display. I remember the rough concrete under one hand and the spongy tar cooler than the sunny day under my other hand. We weren't close enough to hear the vibrations at first, but I knew that was what happened. As soon as Nelson Elder's sobs cut off and his raised. Okay, I want to add something else in before I get into what's going to happen. So let's say Frank was a friend, but he was odd to me. Him being gone made my memories of him odder still. He was raised by his grandfather. I haven't said grandpa this whole time, so I need to stick with it. Alright, he was raised by his grandfather. That made him weird to me. I didn't understand not having parents. Frank's were alive, but he never saw them. I couldn't get any more detail out of him while he had been on the earth. I couldn't picture Frank eating meals, watching TV, or getting help on his homework from his grandfather. His life outside of my presence was a mystery to me. Now I tried to picture where he might be after entering that garage for the last time, and it was a bigger blank for me. Frank was an old man name. Not a boy's name, I always thought. His last name even meant old. Frank would have been set to be an old man with that name. Sometimes he even sounded like an old man, and I wondered if that was because he lived with his grandfather. My throat got tight as I wondered if Frank was ever going to grow older wherever he was now. Alright, now we'll jump back out of there. We weren't close enough to hear the vibrations at first, but I knew that's what happened as soon as Nelson Elder's sobs cut off and his head raised. He walked around the front of that junker car. He walked around the front of that junker car and stopped at the edge of the concrete. By then, we could feel the vibration in the ground all the way to the culvert where we hid. Frank, the old man's shaky sorry, I forgot how to spell all this. And the old man's shaky voice asked. It was a hot, dry day, but I felt cold inside when I heard that. The old man stepped off the concrete and circled on the grass before facing the heavy door I couldn't see but knew was there. Frank, is that you? Olive whispered next to me. Oh my God. Girls said that all the time, even when I was a kid. But in that moment, it sounded very much like an adult expression of horror. Frank, you're not in trouble, son. I'll not punish you none, no matter where you've been hiding? No crying now. Just tell me where you are so I can help. He touched the garage door then, and I wanted him to I wanted to scream for him to get away from that place, trying to shake itself apart in vibrations that sounded too much like overlapping whispers to me. I wanted to scream that Frank was dead because we left him in there when everything happened. I just wanted to scream, but all that escaped me was a whine that turned into a bubble of air I swallowed back down. I'm coming, Frank. My friend's grandfather yelled as he ripped the heavy garage door upward with his bony old arms. He threw that thing open like it was nothing. And I thought in that moment that he might be a good guy to rescue someone. But he ran inside that garage and started screaming. The girls scooted closer to me on both sides, but we still didn't move. All right. Mr. Elder's neighbors stuck their heads out of doors and windows in the section of the street we could see. Hey, man. It's good to see you, John. Glad you dropped by. Hope your holiday is going well. I know you've talked online about struggling with some things over the last few weeks. Kind of been keeping an eye on you, hoping things are going well. Mr. Elder's neighbors stuck their heads out the doors and windows in the section of street we could see. Thanks, man. Then the door crashed back closed. But we could still hear him screaming. I grabbed the shoulders of my friends on both sides. I think I was trying not to pass out, but they took it as a signal for us to run, and it seemed like the best idea to me too. The police did visit me a fourth time, but all the questions were about Frank's grandfather then. Anything odd we had seen between Frank and Mr. Elder. The girls got a visit too. Maybe Mitch as well, but he didn't join us again. Okay, which girl's gonna stay with him? Let's make it Olive. Olive told me about Claire's conversation with the police about 4 days later. I didn't see Claire again that summer. We had classes together later and were still on friendly terms, but we didn't pal around after that. Olive went with me back to the garage that had eaten Frank and his grandfather. just the two of us. Lots of things were weird after Frank vanished. One thing was the growing imbalance in our crew. Three guys and two girls was perfect. 3 guys and 2 girls was perfect. It kept things from looking like we were coupling up. With Frank gone, it was 2 and 2. With Mitch gone, I was hanging out with 2 girls. Now that they'd all deserted me, I was alone with Olive in the backyard of an empty house. The garage door hung open as we rounded Nelson Elder's old car. We grabbed each other's hands without concern for how it might look. I glanced at the house like I was expecting to see someone watching us. That picture window looked dirty and old in a way it hadn't less than a week ago. We finally walked wide out onto the driveway to look into the open maw of that deadly building. The inside looked much as it had the day we'd looked through the dirty windows. That is probably the reason we failed to notice the changes in the light at first. The difference that stood out to me was the small piece of yellow police tape curled up at the edge of the garage's interior. Alright. I feel like this brings a whole new opportunity for heckling. We usually don't get to heckle during the writing process. Oh, feel free, man. On Twitch, we just call that interaction, so feel free to jump in. You want to tell me that my story is paced too slow or something, I guess. The difference that stood out to me was the small piece of yellow police tape curled up at the edge of the garage's interior. No other signs of investigation remained other than the open garage itself. I wanted to believe the police had left it that way. Much the same. Come on, Jay. I've been here for minutes and I haven't seen one where genital. Not one. How the hell am I supposed to write another article? Yeah, John had written an article about how different genital mutilation had sort of popped up in different authors. It was both funny and disturbing to see how many examples there were. And then people started giving you more examples to where you might have to write another article. Oh, that was funny. All right. I want to believe the police had left it that way. I was shocked nothing had been stolen. My parents closed their garage, our garage, and locked it every time we weren't out there. There wasn't much of value, but still I felt Olive no, she didn't feel it, just how it happened. Olive gripped my arm until I noticed how much it hurt. Then she whispered my name in a way that reminded me of the voices from this place. I was trying to think of something to say, and I noticed the light inside. The fixture on the beam above was missing a bulb, but the air itself had yellowed with patches of red light bleeding from the corners. Right. If this was king, they would have certainly been some incidental groping by now. Actually, that's awful because it is such a great book and all that awfulness that's in it. I actually kind of thought about that as I was realizing there were going to be young characters in here, and very specifically kind of keeping away from any sort of like romantic entanglements that might sidetrack the story, much less some of that nonsense, right? All right. The yellow was wrong. Not light at all, but a change in the world. An old photograph. Like, let me fix that. Like an old photograph. Like poison or decay in the air itself. Like the end of the world. Expressed in every particle floating in front of our faces. Then things started to fold open and closed in there. I'm recording this to edit later, so when you release this, I'll have the unauthorized audiobook ready to go. That's fine, man. We'll work out a very generous contract. All right, then things started to fold open and closed. Not the cabinets in the back, but the space between itself. Colors, shapes, and edges below that yellow film and beyond the borders of the garage and the dimension it should have occupied. I stepped forward. Then I shuffled my other foot up shuffled my other foot up for another step. I was going inside like Frank and like his grandfather. I was taking a trip to another place. The police would ask questions, but Olive was good at sticking to a simple story. I might get to see what dinner was like with Frank and Mr. Elder. Olive's hand was gone, and the bones in my arm ached. Olive's hand was gone, and the bones in my arm ached from how hard she had gripped me before she was missing. It broke my hypnosis, if that's what happened to me. That's what happened to me. I'm still not sure. I was afraid for Olive. Stepping back, she had not run for the culvert. I felt the place pulling me once I'd stopped coming on my own. So 2 questions. Is this a short story or a book? And second, are there any other people I might know in it? It is a short story. I've been writing some that are closer to about 2,000 words. This one's a touch over 3,000 right now, and there's going to be at least one more scene after this one. Are there any other people I might know in it? I don't know. Everybody seems to be disappearing. All right. I felt the place pulling once I'd stopped coming on my own. The mouth made of that impossibly heavy door reached out as if to capture me, like lips pulling in the next bite. Alright, I staggered backward, still felt too close, and stumbled into an elbow skinning roll. So that's how I saw Olive running up Ripon Court without me. I might have felt betrayed, except that was the moment I knew I needed to escape. I ran after her, but never caught her. Alright, one more scene. I don't know if this story is actually going to be a satisfying conclusion at this point, but we'll see. Fit one more scene in, I think. Okay. I lied to my parents after that, more than I already had. I pretended to go meet my friends, but no one was meeting me. So I walked that culvert to the elder property, as it's okay. No, let's not do that. So I walked the culvert to the elder property alone several more days before school started again. Sometimes the police were there, and I'd watch from hiding. Other times, kids from the neighborhood were painting the bricks or breaking windows in the old car. They would wander toward the garage, but then would slink away. One time, an old man, homeless maybe, tried to grab me as I came out of the culvert, but I outran him, and he was not even the scariest thing I had seen that day or that summer. The garage still vibrated. A few times I drew close enough to hear it. No, close enough to see the boards pulsing from the sides like it was breathing. The voices grew clearer to me. The voices grew clearer to me, and they started to speak to me in Frank and in Mr. Elder's voices. We need you. Please help us. We're saving you a place. need you, please help us. We're saving you a place. The world is pain and death. Join us here, where no one can die, no matter how much they beg. I've told them all about you, and they want to meet you. They talk about you all the time. ZB. If you don't come on your own, they will come for you. They know where you live because I know. They know what you fear because you have been marked. It will be easier if you just come on your own instead of forcing them to hunt you. I still, in my nightmares, Frank Elder's voice is still the one that whispers to me. In my nightmares, Frank Elder's voice is still the one that speaks to me. And that voice never gets older. Alright. My last visit to the garage was the most dangerous. The strange yellow light crept out of the windows and the gaps between boards, feeling my skin like cold fingers. But I persisted. The place was as dry as any kindling I might find, but I took no chances. I probably left fingerprints all over those cans, but the police never visited me again on the elder case. I could smell the stuff on my fingers, but I kept pulling those match heads along the sandpaper strip. I was sure I'd burn up with that place. And I feared dying this close to it would offer me no escape. Then I feared the place was keeping the matches from striking. With the pack, with the book almost empty, one finally lit. I stared at it. Like I thought I might be imagining the whole thing. Then the cardboard, then the flimsy cardboard and the remaining few matches went up in my hand. The heat woke me up, and I threw the burning bit onto the wet edge of the walls. The garage turned orange as the... Let's make that rusty, because we've used the word rust before. Turned rusty orange as the flames climbed within that yellow film, creeping around the place. I backed away slowly. Each time the terrible heat reached me, I backed away some more, watching the flames envelop the roof. Then I heard the voices. So many voices that I feared I'd let all the evil escape that place. Evil that knew where I lived because Frank knew back when we were friends. As I heard no, I don't need to hear it, just say it. As the sirens approached, I realized the voices were the neighbors watching the building go up in flames. The fire jumped to the roof of the main house, and that caught too. I realized that I was still standing there with my hands smelling of the stuff. I turned and escaped through the dry culvert. No one ever pinned it on me. I'm not sure I deserved a medal, but at least I didn't end up with a record. Lots of people talked about the elders and the fire. Not me, though. Not Olive, and not Claire either. Mitch, probably not, because he never talked to any of us again. Whatever that was that possessed that garage and took away Frank. Whatever that was that possessed that garage and took away Frank before using his voice to haunt me. I want to believe it lost its hold on our world with that fire. Maybe I doomed Frank and his grandfather to a world where they can never die, no matter how much they beg. but I was only ever going to get trapped and never save them. I don't know what I hope, except that I hope I live long enough to stop hearing Frank Elder whisper to me in my dreams. And I hope those voices no longer know where I live now that I moved away and will never go back. Alright, that's it. I think that ending was a little stronger than I expected it to be, so I guess I wrapped that up pretty well. So this story came out to 3,900 words, The Garage That Ate Frank Elder, and I think it holds together pretty well. The kids in the story don't, other than of course the kid that's taken at the beginning before the story begins. The kids in the story don't suffer too much direct damage. There's just the threat there, and as their friendships kind of pull apart, and as they deal with a loss that they can't quite wrap their brains around, I think it turns into a pretty good story with some good layers, and some of it will probably have to be perfected a little bit in the editing. So I imagine as I go back through it later, I'll find some themes and some pieces that I can really build on. The final version will probably be a little over 4,000 words, and I think it's a good framework. I always have a lot of work to do after a first draft, but I think this is a strong one. It makes a good, solid horror story. Thank you, man. I appreciate you jumping on and keeping me company as we went through. So again, thank you to everybody for jumping in, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.